During college, I dated a fairly well-known and talented local musician named Tim. As horrible boyfriends tend to be in the beginning, he was loving, attentive, charismatic, and seemingly a very normal partner. He made me personal mixtapes, cooked me my favorite meals, and even dedicated songs to me at open mics around town. I, young, foolish, and naive, was deeply smitten by his mysterious, dark, and artistic allure. However, over the course of our year-long relationship, his mental health severely declined. He had the ability to appear lucid and normal around other people, but in private he began suffering severe delusions. He would compulsively lie and started creating art that focused heavily on themes of rape and murder. I was worried sick, and his condition was exhausting, but I did my very best to be kind, understanding, and supportive. I loved him and believed he shouldn't have to struggle with this mental illness alone. One time, he vanished without a trace for an entire day. I found his apartment empty, lights on, front door wide open, phone still on his nightstand. I took a few deep breaths and called all around the city for hours before finally discovering he had involuntarily been checked into a mental hospital. I did my best to be strong for him, seeing him every day during supervised visitation hour, bringing him his favorite books to pass the time, and holding him as he sobbed that it was all a mistake, that he did not belong there. It was surreal to see my gentle, intelligent, and normal, albeit somewhat depressed boyfriend surrounded by visibly insane long-term psych ward patients. I mean, for real, the place was like something out of a horror movie. In retrospect, none of the staff ever told me the real reason why he was there, and I was too polite and naive to ask. Our relationship ended a few months later. I found undeniable evidence he was cheating on me, and secretly relieved I confronted him. I told him to leave my apartment and never come back. He cracked in that moment. The gentle Tim I had known and loved melted away to reveal a new persona, one with dead, wild animal eyes. He threatened to kill himself with pills unless I took him back, but I was so extremely done that I just called the police instead. They weren't much help, of course, but Tim did leave after that. I blocked him everywhere and never contacted him again. He would leave me insane voicemails, though, from different numbers every time, for weeks and weeks afterwards. I was relatively unshaken, though, and things eventually returned to normalcy. I graduated and got a sweet job in the same cool college city. 6 months later, I woke up to concerned texts from mutual friends saying they didn't want to freak me out, but Tim was off his meds now. He was clearly manic and posting a newly written song all over social media. His best friend, who hadn't been in touch since before the breakup, sent me an apology, along with a screenshot of the lyrics. That got my attention. I won't copy and paste them here because they'll lead back to his Bandcamp, but I knew immediately the song was pretty explicitly about my rape and murder, but in a clever, disguised way. A catchy way too, apparently, the bastard. I checked his profiles myself from a friend's account. He was posting dozens and dozens of totally insane rambling statuses, most of them all about me. They flip-flopped between flowery love prose and murder imagery. His friends were reacting with concern, but a few egged him on, probably thinking he was just venting about his ex. I decided it would be best to continue ignoring him, but I saved screenshots just in case. A few days later, while at work, I looked up from my computer to see Tim enter into the far side of the studio. My blood turned to ice. He was talking to my creative director. It looked cordial enough from first glance, until I saw Tim begin to casually scan the studio searching for me. I ducked down and bolted into my favorite project manager's office. I slammed the door and unleashed upon her what must have been a nearly unintelligible explanation of what was happening. I was shaking so hard I could barely even speak. Nancy, though, for her part, was amazing. She understood everything almost immediately. She snuck me out of the building and drove me in her car to the police station, where I showed officers the screenshots and filed a report. My coworkers later told me Tim was there to inquire about the open designer position. Well, he was not a designer. He had brought with him a fake portfolio and an elaborately fabricated work history that sounded completely legit. At the end of his interview, he'd even casually asked if I still worked there. He said we used to collaborate. Oh, and he had written a song just for me. It had been picked up by the local radio this morning. He asked my coworkers to let me know with warmest regards. That phrase still makes my skin crawl. He then left, found my abandoned car in the parking lot, and paced around it in circles until the police arrived. Unfortunately, he was not enough of a public menace for police to bring him in that day, but the incident did help me to secure a restraining order against him. My company was amazing too, luckily. I was deeply embarrassed about my literally insane ex coming to the studio. The CEO filed trespassing charges against him and created an action plan to keep me safe if it happened again. Not long afterwards, though, I moved to a different city, and that was that. I haven't heard from him since. I discovered the most alarming part later, though. His roommate at the time, Liz, went through a similar experience with him during his breakdown. When we compared notes much later, she said she had seen a large axe in Tim's car the very same week it had all gone down. She was worried about Tim's Facebook activity, so she removed the axe and hid it while he didn't know. Tim was so angry when he found out, he completely trashed their entire house and never came back. If all our timelines are correct, that must have been just before he came into my workplace for his interview. So this story might not really be as spectacular as some of the other ones you've heard, though it was disturbing enough that I remember the event in vivid detail. It is somewhat long, but I'll try to condense it to the point it doesn't bore anyone or anything. The cast is myself, my sister S, and the older dude Carl. It's not his real name, but it will be used for the sake of this story. This happened when I was around the age of 14 to 15. I had gone to a theme park, Great America, I think, when my older sister was around the age of 17 or 18. S pestered me to go onto a ride with her that I was not comfortable riding at the time. Finally, after a bunch of bugging though, I budged and said I'd go with her. While we stood in line, S and I heard Carl yelling about his favorite sports teams to seemingly nobody. He was with a group of girls, so we assumed he was just having a good time with his friends, but apparently that was not the case. Anyway, S and I got on the ride from start to finish. The ride itself was like a pirate ship that basically swung back and forth similar to a pendulum, and eventually started to do complete circles, causing passengers to temporarily hang upside down. The ride itself is not really key to the story, beside the fact that it made me extremely nauseous afterwards. After the ride had finished, I noticed that the girls that were previously with Carl had left him while screaming that he was a weirdo. I didn't really pay that much attention to them. My stomach was seriously acting up. I guess I should have though. At the time, S and I were standing on top of a bridge, and I told S I needed a minute to recompose myself. I walked over to the railing of the bridge and leaned over to breathe some fresh air while trying my best not to puke. Basic breathing stuff, really. This is where the story gets weird. While I'm leaning over this railing, I suddenly feel these huge arms wrap around my waist, and then I'm hoisted up into the air. Initially, I'm freaking out, trying to comprehend what the hell is actually happening to me in that moment. All I really knew is that now I was in the air, and I was not exactly sure why. I thought whoever was holding me up was going to throw me over the bridge, but instead they put me down on the ground after a moment. I instantly whipped around, only to see Carl there smiling at me. S ran over to stand beside me and asked Carl why he'd just yanked me up into the air. I was still in a state of shock at the time and couldn't speak. The following conversation ensued. "Why the hell did you pick him up?" "Oh, well, he looked sick and like he might need some fresh air." "Tell me how exactly lifting someone into the air is going to help with a sickness." Carl ignored the question and stared at me, asking me how I was doing. I ignored him in turn and looked away from him, since my sister was now doing all the talking. come on, kid. Look at someone when they speak to you. You bored or something? I bet you're bored going on rides with your sister, friend, sibling. Doesn't matter. I heard her screaming her lungs out on that ride we all just went on. I bet she doesn't want to go on any of the more scary ones. Yeah, she's no fun. You'll probably have to go home soon because of her. Note, my sister had been screaming a lot on the ride. She told me she screams on rides because it raises her adrenaline levels, causing her to have more fun or something. Leave him alone. What we're doing is none of your business. Oh, but it is. I want everyone that comes to this park to have a great time. I mean, it's great America after all. Tell you what, kid, how about you and I go to the water park and ditch your little friend here? She's not going to have much fun getting wet anyway, but trust me, we will. We can both go on all the water rides that you want, and afterwards I can take you out and grab some lunch maybe. I don't know what you all think about an old random man asking a 14 to 15-year-old to go out with him, but I instantly thought this dude was trying to kidnap me. I felt this guy was a danger to myself and possibly S as well, so I made a movement to walk away from him. Carl suddenly stepped in front of me to block my path of exit, so I had to think of another way we could get past him. I feigned getting a phone call from my parents. Hi, Mom? Oh yeah, my sister and I were just getting off the pirate ship ride. Wait, you're waiting right outside the ride near the food court? Okay, my sister and I will meet you there right now then. See you soon! I said it in a loud enough voice that Carl could hear everything that transpired, and with newly found confidence I pushed right past him. S and I walked away from Carl in the direction that my feigned mother was apparently waiting. After we walked for about 10 to 15 seconds, we both broke out into a sprint until we reached the park entrance. We tried to tell the front desk people about the guy, but they said since nothing actually happened, they couldn't really do anything. So last night, I was at a classmate's house, working on a group project we have due tomorrow. I live in an apartment in the town where our university is located. My classmate lives at his parents' house, which is in the foothills just outside of town. In order to get to the house, you have to drive along a relatively secluded and narrow 2-lane road for about 5 or 6 miles. We started working on the project at about 6 p.m., and I ended up hanging around for a while after we had finished our working. I left his house pretty late, at about 11 or so, and started down the road back towards town. I didn't quite realize how tough it would be though to navigate this road at night. There were no streetlights and the road was completely unkempt and riddled with potholes. On top of this, I had no cell service either, so I had to drive very slowly to make sure I didn't blow out one of my tires, since I had just used my spare a couple of weeks back. I figure I was about 3 miles from the house when I rounded a tight corner and saw a pickup truck with a camper shell parked diagonally across the road. The manner in which it was parked completely impeded my path forward, and I couldn't drive around it either. There was a gully on both sides of the road. The only way for me to go at this point was backward, where there was a pull-off that I could use to turn my car around. At first, I couldn't see inside the cab, but when I turned on my high beams, I saw there was a man slouched over in the driver's seat, his head resting against the steering wheel as if he had just been knocked out by a very bad accident. I immediately sensed that something was wrong here. The way his car had just coincidentally come to rest in a position that totally blocked off the road was a big red flag for me. I had heard stories before of people playing dead in the road as a way to lure unsuspecting people out of their cars so they could try and rob them. I decided, fuck this shit. I elected to go back to my classmate's house and explain exactly what was going on. I threw the car into reverse and kept my eyes darting back and forth between my rear view and that truck. I looked and saw that I was almost at the pull-off where I could turn around finally. When I looked back at that truck, my heart skipped about 5 beats. The man who had just moments ago been slouched over in the driver's seat was now sprinting at my car at a hurried pace, while a few other men jumped out of the camper shell and started moving towards me as well. I panicked and accelerated backwards into the pull-off, which messed up the undercarriage of my car pretty bad. As I put it into drive, the guy had already reached my passenger side door and was tugging on the handle. Thank the Lord I had remembered to lock it. I only got a brief glimpse of him, but his face appeared to be scabbed and leathery. Definitely a meth head or some sort of drug abuser. I sped away and didn't slow down at all until I reached the house, constantly checking my rear view to see if they were following. Thankfully, they didn't tail me, and when I reached the house, I explained what had happened to my classmate. We called the cops together. I was extremely grateful my buddy's parents were kind enough to let me stay that night. They didn't find anyone on the road matching the description, but I filed an incident report. They told me they would be on the lookout for similar vehicles and suspicious activity. But holy shit, I'm still so shaken up over it. I kept getting the same adrenaline rush I got when I saw the guy charging me whenever I think about it. Please share any similar experiences you've had. I would appreciate a good read or discussion to help me clear my headspace on this incident. To put this into context, I'm an 18-year-old girl living in New Zealand. I suffer from anxiety and shut down in stressful situations. I tend to become rather overwhelmed when I'm not sure how to deal with something. This story happened yesterday, whilst I was waiting at my bus station to catch a ride home. I'd had a very long day at work, and my legs were very much in pain. All I wanted to do was get home and watch some YouTube or read something in bed or something. It was getting quite dark and the sun was almost completely down. As I was listening to some music in a rather deserted area of the bus station, a man considerably larger than myself sauntered up and sat down directly next to me on the bench. I didn't really think much of this at first. To put this into perspective, I'm roughly 55 kilograms. He must have been at least 100 and could have very easily overpowered me. I noticed out of the corner of my eye that this man was staring at me. I began to feel a little bit uncomfortable and pegged it up to maybe him looking at my mask or something. It was rather nondescript and just black. I ignored this and acted busy on my phone to avoid conversation. As I said, I'd had a long day at work and would rather not be bothered. The man began to talk to me, and I pulled out my AirPod to listen to what he was saying to me. The AirPod fell and landed on the ground, which he picked up for me. He held onto it and stared at it for a few moments before handing it back to me. I was already starting to get bad vibes from this man. The conversation went something like this. "Your eyes are so beautiful. Did you get them from your mom or your dad?" I don't know, my mom, I guess." I kept my replies short to signify I wasn't in the mood for talking, but he continued nonetheless. "What bus are you catching? Where do you live?" I laughed nervously and told him I didn't feel very comfortable sharing that information. I told him it was farther up north. Completely unprompted, he then said, "Why, it's not like I'm going to rape you. Isn't it really fancy up there?" This is where I began to feel seriously uncomfortable and began to shake. He asked if I had a boyfriend, to which I said yes. He proceeded to ask if I planned to marry him, to which I laughed and said yes again. "Oh, it kind of sounds like you're just rooting him. Are you sure you want that?" I was shocked and looked at him again. "Yes, I do plan to marry my partner. What business is it of yours?" "How old are you?" I don't know what came over me, but I told him I was 21 to make it come across I was old enough to stand up for myself. "Are you on the pill? Do you use condoms instead?" I wanted to walk away, but I was grounded to that bench and couldn't move a muscle if I tried. I was uncomfortable and confused as to why he was getting so close to me. "Do you have someone waiting for you at the bus stop, or are you walking home? How far do you live?" This is the question that made everything click into place, and I realized this guy definitely had malicious intent. He was not being friendly. This man was going to follow me home and either rape me or kidnap me. I started to really panic and started desperately looking for onlookers. A young man, possibly my age, walked out of the public restroom. He had overheard this conversation and was looking at the predator rather skeptically. I knew then I'd at least have someone to help if I just asked for it. In the moment, though, I didn't. By this point, though, I recalled a video from r/ about a highly pregnant woman and her daughter being followed to their car in an empty car park in the dark by an older man. This lady was stressfully trying to find her keys in her purse, as this man was standing beside her daughters on the opposite side of the car, making small talk with them. I remember someone commented on this submission saying it was a popular thing that he was waiting for her to unlock the car so he could get in and control her via threats to her children. It occurred to me that maybe I could skip my bus and catch another one instead. I did this exactly. He kept trying to ask where I lived, and I kept refusing to tell him where. He also continued to ask how far I lived from the stop and if anyone was waiting for me. I deflected all of his questions, and after 40 minutes he began to get grumpy and walked away from the station. He wasn't there to catch a bus at all, but to prey on young women at the bus stop. I caught my bus when it arrived a few minutes after he left. I ran home, where I completely broke down and cried in the arms of my partner. This morning, I was so stressed I contemplated taking the day off work and staying in bed for the rest of it to cry. I was petrified. In the end, though, I still ended up going, and I'm at work sharing this story. At about 8 p.m. last night, yeah, what a spooky time, I was walking with a friend of mine, Sally, about a mile to the closest cafe. We're both girls in our early 20s. Neither of us own cars, and Sally didn't have her Opal card, which is the Aussie version of an Oyster card, basically an automatic ticketing system for public transport. This meant that walking was our only option. It's summer over here right now, so it was still fairly well lit. We were walking down main roads as well, so we weren't too concerned for our safety. We finally arrived at this cafe and sat down together. I was paying, but I only had my credit card with me. Sure enough, the restaurant was cash only. Sally was on the phone when I got back from the counter, so I gestured for her to stay put and guard the spot while I went to go grab some cash. This was my home suburb, so I know there's no ATMs around. My best bet was a gas station about a block away. I'm doing a light jog so I wouldn't keep Sally waiting, when a balding, sweating man, probably in his late 40s, with a tank top and no shoes, came running behind me as I passed the corner of the block. He began walking behind me for about 100 meters. I really didn't think too much of it at first. The gas station was the next building along, and it seemed like he had just come out of a very nice suburban house along the street. It wasn't the witching hour yet either, so I just assumed he was in a hurry to get to the gas station like I was. He didn't even cross my mind as I entered the tiny convenience store, nor did he attempt to follow me in. In my peripheral vision, I could see him walk right past the door and out of sight. I began to look around for an ATM that they sometimes have inside. No such luck, unfortunately. I went up to this man in his 30s behind the desk and reluctantly asked if they were able to do cash out. He smiled politely at me. Of course. Is that man with you, by the way? I have no idea who he's talking about at first. He pointed to the man from earlier, though, who was now pacing around outside the store. Keep in mind, he didn't look at all menacing. He wasn't just going back and forth right outside the door or anything. He was drifting in the space outside, from the pavement to the gas pumps to the storefront, seemingly aimlessly. I assumed he must be on drugs or something. I told the clerk no, not thinking very much of it at all. Oh, well, he was really staring at you before, you know. I thought he might have been your dad or something. I laughed it off. Honestly, I was not too concerned. He was just ambling around outside. I couldn't imagine him having a fixed gaze on anything. I thanked the clerk for the cash, but before I turned away to leave, he said, "Why don't you just wait here for a second? Let's see if he leaves first." We waited there for a few minutes together in silence, as the guy began to pace back and forth directly against the front wall of the store, looking straight ahead and never inside. It still looked like the man was just on a drug-induced shamble and seemed harmless. Not once did he seem to even attempt to look at me, so I figured it would be safe to just slip out the door and walk back to the cafe in the fairly bright light of dusk, especially since Sally was texting me at this point, rushing me to come back. I thanked the guy at the desk once again for his concern, and assured him that I did not know the guy and was not involved in some weird scheme to rob the store or something. As I started to head for the door, the clerk called out and asked if I wanted him to walk out with me. I said I should be alright, and began walking away from the block. As I left the store though, the drifting man stopped pacing immediately, and began to make a beeline for me from the other end of the building. I seriously hadn't given a single thought to this guy at all up until this point, but for the first time he was now heading in a straight line toward me. The hairs on the back of my neck immediately stood straight up. I started power walking so he wouldn't think I was actively trying to escape him, still trying to convince myself I was just being paranoid and should be more casual instead. I didn't look behind me to see how close he was. I'd reached the pavement on the other side of the gas pumps when I heard the store clerk sprint outside. "Go! Run!" I made a break for it, looking over my shoulder. He'd grabbed the man by his arms from behind. The balding man was not even glancing at the attendant or trying to escape. He just stood there watching me run away. That's pretty much the end of the story, folks. I kept running until I crossed the road, then turned around and stood still. The cashier was now holding firmly onto the odd, staring man. We shared a brief glance in bewilderment, not really knowing what to do. He made a hand gesture to go. I gestured my thanks and ran away. I got back to Sally with the cash and bought the food, before walking back home a different way. To set the tone for this, I always hated the town I lived in. I moved there alone when I was 18 for college, and very quickly regretted it. It was a decent-sized town, but full of not-so-decent people. Nearly every gas station was robbed frequently. There were shootings all the time in broad daylight. Robberies, kidnappings, you name it. For the first 3 years, I lived with roommates on a side of town that wasn't particularly awful. It was just a bit sketchy. How lucky. When I was making decent enough money, I decided to move out on my own. The house was tiny, maybe 500 square feet if that. It was super old and poorly built as well. I was the only person living there, so I didn't really mind how small it was. What originally sold me though was that it was right in the middle of nowhere. It was surrounded by a bunch of fields and wooded areas, with only a scant few houses nearby. Considering I despised being in the town itself due to the continuous paranoia of being mugged or shot for no reason, I loved the idea of living where nobody was out there. At the beginning of July, I moved in. Everything seemed super swell, minus not being able to get good internet. A month went by and everything was still super good for me. I decided to get a dog to keep me company. He also loved the place, and spent large amounts of time lounging about the yard and trying to convince the nearest neighbor to walk over and pet him. This is in fact a detail that will be important later. After about 2 months of living there though, I started to notice things were out of place sometimes. Something to note is that an old roommate of mine was using my spare room as a storage space until he got moved himself. So he had a key to move his stuff there, but never really came by. He kinda popped in once every other week or so to maybe grab something from storage and usually let me know beforehand. Now though, I'd come home to my kitchen chair being obviously pulled away from my table, or a new bowl in the sink, things like that. They were such small, innocuous things, at first I wrote it off as my roommate swinging by, or perhaps something I'd forgotten because I was really tired. Then though, my dog started to develop this crazy bad separation anxiety. Up until now, he didn't even care when I left. He'd just lay on the couch and chew his toys all day. He never barked, never did anything weird. All of a sudden though, he began acting really awful every time I tried to leave. He'd literally cram his body through the door as I was closing it, screaming and barking, and would not stop until I came back inside with him. He didn't want me to leave him there alone at all. I couldn't afford a kennel for him, so I decided one day I'd put a movie in while I was out, thinking maybe the sound of people talking might keep him calmed down. I only had to finish one task at work, and I knew I'd be home early that day, so I popped in a copy of Hamlet. I know, it's pretty boring, but I chose it because the copy I have is 5 hours long. I knew it would still be playing when I came back. Flash forward 3 hours though. Long before that copy of Hamlet should have been over. When I walked through the door, not only was the movie not playing, but the TV and all the appliances were completely off. I immediately called my roommate and asked if he had been over. He wasn't even in town at the time. I explained the TV situation to him. He shrugged it off as the TV powering off when it idled for a while. Even though this could be true, there were several reasons I knew this wasn't the case. 1, it was not idling, a 5-hour movie was supposed to be playing. And 2, even if it shut off by itself, my Xbox that was playing it wouldn't have turned off too. I had once left it on by accident for weeks while I was out of town or whatever, and it was still on when I came home, always, but everything was completely powered down this time. The weird thing was though, none of my stuff was missing. The door was even fully locked when I entered. I eventually convinced myself perhaps it was a weird shortage with the Xbox or whatever, and shrugged it off. That is, until my dog started acting even weirder. Remember earlier when I mentioned he used to play with the neighbor? Well, all of a sudden, if she walked by the house while he was out, he'd start screaming and running at me away from her. This was incredibly weird to me, and made me suspicious of her as well. I put some cheap alarms on all my doors, the kind that go off when they're opened, and slept with my pistol handy. The second night the alarms were on my doors, I was woken up by the one on the back door going off. I flew out of bed with my pistol, trying to convince myself that I was about to shoot some intruder. Once I got there, it was shut though, and there was nobody around. The alarm had been knocked all the way across the room though. The door would have had to been opened really hard for it to be chucked like that. It couldn't have fallen off and just landed there. The weirdest thing was though, the door was still locked, but not the way I had locked it. I always locked the knob and the deadbolt, but upon checking my lock after this, only the doorknob was locked. The police wouldn't do very much, as I had no witnesses, no leads, and they didn't have much to go on. Needless to say, I changed the lock shortly thereafter. I didn't have any noticeable problems inside after that, but I later found out my close neighbor that my dog now hated had previously lived in the house I was renting. The locks had never been changed. I have no way to really prove my theory, but it's pretty obvious she had a key and was coming and going as she pleased. The why though, I really can't figure out. None of my stuff ever went missing, not even the money. The most unsettling part for me though, is that she tried to come in at night until the alarm scared her off. How many times had she come into my house at night while I was asleep? And why had she done so? In 2012, I worked at a tanning salon in a strip mall. It was across the street from a Walmart that was always crawling with strange people. The strip mall that my salon was located in was very poorly lit at night as well. There was a sushi restaurant and an auto zone, but other than that, the other stores were all vacant. We were open until about 10 p.m., while the other two businesses closed at 8 or 9. The salon was never overwhelmingly busy, so there was always only one person working at a time. My best friend also worked at this company, and the salon she worked at was a 15-minute drive from mine. This detail will be important later. I'm a bit of a night owl myself, so usually I work the 3 to 10 p.m. shift every weeknight. At some point in time, I started to get these strange phone calls at exactly 8 p.m. every single night. It started off strange, but nothing to be alarmed about. The first time he called went something like this. Hi, I'm conducting a survey on women's shopping habits. I figured calling a tanning salon run by women would be a good place to start. We'll also send you a gift if you participate in the survey. Okay. Do you typically wear jeans, yoga pants, leggings, skirts, shorts, dresses perhaps? Feel free to list each of these that you wear. I wear all of those occasionally. Great! Now, when you wear dresses or skirts, do you ever wear pantyhose? Not unless it's winter. So, how many tights or pantyhose pairs do you own altogether? I don't know, like 5, I guess? This is really great information. So, would you be interested in us sending you some free sample pantyhose? No thanks. I'm not really interested. I don't think I'd wear them enough to really care. Okay. We totally understand. Would it be okay if I called you for a survey in the future as well? Alright, if you need to. When do you typically work? Every weeknight. Alright, great. I'll talk to you soon. I shouldn't have given some random person my work schedule, but they were already calling my job, so there was no denying this person could easily find me if they really wanted. Honestly, I didn't really think anything was weird about that call at all at the time. Later in the month, we had a store meeting, and the weekend sales associate said she had gotten a few weird calls from a guy breathing heavily and asking her strange questions. She didn't go into much detail though, so I didn't make the connection at the time. The next few times he called, it seemed normal enough as well. One survey was on skirts and skirt length and brands. The next was about dresses and what type of brands women prefer. He kept offering to send me pantyhose though. I kept telling him I didn't need them. He would always just laugh it off and say, "Okay, I just wanted to make sure. I have to offer them every call as our protocol, you see." The very last survey he called to have me do though really started to scare me. When you wear dresses and skirts, do you wear panties with them? Yeah. What material are they? Silk, satin, cotton, lace? I'm not really comfortable answering this question. I think I'm done with all these surveys. Oh, come on. I just want to know what you wear under that dress. I'll bring you some nylons and panties right now. I hung up and freaked out. I called my friend at the other salon and told her about what just happened. She told me the same guy had been calling her location as well, trying to talk to girls about pantyhose and panties. He had even described to one girl exactly what she was doing while she was on the phone with him. The salon she worked at had glass front windows, with the desk facing toward them. My salon also had this setup, but the desk faced the wall instead. The next few nights were hell. He realized none of us were picking up the calls anymore unless he blocked the number first. We had to answer blocked calls because if it was another customer and they complained, we would be the ones getting in trouble. He started changing up the time of night he called, spoofing fake numbers. His calls were getting creepier and creepier as well. Heavy breathing, telling us exactly what we were wearing, saying he was taking pictures of us and imagining us in our panties. Really creepy stuff. I was starting to be afraid to be at work. I made sure to be on the phone with my friend from the other salon every night, for my last hour or so. One day though, the calls just suddenly stopped. I'll never know if this next incident was related to this, but I will forever think it was. My salon had a waiting area by the desk when you walked in. Then it had a very long hallway with 20 rooms. The last 2 rooms were the spray tan rooms, which needed to be sprayed down each night at close. At the very end of the hallway was a door leading to the dumpsters in the back. To the left of that door was the washer and dryer. Now, at a tanning salon, you generally see the same kind of people. Women of all shapes and sizes, metrosexual men, really buff guys, and guys who come along dragged by their girlfriends. You never saw overweight, dirty, or middle-aged men coming in to get their tan on. This particular night, 20 minutes to close, a guy fitting that exact description walked in. My heart sank. I had the immediate gut feeling that this was the phone creep. I acted normal and asked him his last name. He told me he'd never been there before, so I explained to him how much a single tan on a regular night cost and explained our packages as well. I could see immediately, though, my words were falling on deaf ears. He opened his mouth wide and wagged his tongue out, breathing heavily. It didn't sound like the guy from the phone's voice, but people could easily change their sound. He asked for the most basic bed for 5 minutes. Huge red flag. Why did you even come in then if you're only going to come for 5 minutes? I put him in the bed and immediately got on the phone with my friend from the other salon. She was the manager there, so she decided to close shop early and race over to me just in case I needed her. I had the back door propped open, as it was hot as hell inside the salon. I wanted to get a cool breeze going while I cleaned the rooms. The dryer was also running, which could have impacted my hearing. I was in one of the rooms near the front sweeping, when I realized it had been 15 minutes, and I hadn't ever heard this guy walk out the front door yet. I had hoped he would just leave while I was sweeping up in the rooms so I wouldn't have to deal with him. I go down the hall to listen outside the room he was in, only to discover the room was empty. He clearly had not even used the bed, as there were no marks or anything and the glass remained completely clean. I called out to see if he was still there. "Sir?" No response. I called my friend immediately. I suddenly had this horrible feeling of dread. "Where are you?" I yelled into the phone. "I'm right here, I'm pulling up right now, relax. Did he leave yet?" I frantically explained to her what happened, and told her loudly so he would hear if he was still in the store. I told her to bring her bat as well. My friend came rushing in 3 minutes later holding a steel bat. In that moment it was horrifying, but thinking about it now, it was hilarious. She's 5'0" and 100 pounds, and I'm about the same size. Together, we started going into the rooms one by one. When we made it to the 6th room, we heard the back door slam shut hard. We ran to it and locked it. We still checked the other rooms, but we both know what had happened. He had been hiding in one of the empty ones, and bolted when he realized we were searching room to room for him. I don't know what his plans were for me that night and why he hid in an empty room, but I'm thankful my friend was there to help me. I was 12 and my older sister and I were home alone for the weekend. I was waiting for a friend to come pick me up and was getting quite restless waiting. There was suddenly a knock on my door. I remember thinking it was my friend. I ran to answer it without even checking through the peephole. A man was standing there instead, holding a clipboard. He said he needed to come inside and check our gas meter. I was entrenched in the disappointment of my friend still not having arrived, so I just told him, "Yeah, sure, whatever you need to do." I didn't notice at the time, but he was not dressed as a city official. Instead, he had on a green and purple shirt with bold stripes, just like the host of Blue's Clues. He came in and immediately went up the stairs to where our bedrooms were. He walked into the open door of my room, the typical girly girl room with pink and glitter scattered around. Thank God my sister came downstairs at almost that exact moment. She exclaimed in surprise, "Oh, that's Daphne's dad, right? Why is he going upstairs?" I complained about how Daphne wasn't here yet and was going on about how unreliable she was when my sister cut me off immediately. Wait. If Daphne's not here, then who is that?" "He's here to read the gas meters," he said. Her face turned white immediately. She flung open the front door and dragged me outside, hand clamped over my protesting mouth. "Our gas meters are outside," she whispered to me. Neither of us had a cell phone since it was the 60s, and obviously we were not going back in the house to call authorities on the landline phone. My ever-resourceful sister, though, had a stroke of genius in that moment. A man happened to be walking right by our house. She motioned him to come over. She called out loudly, directly into the house. "Oh, hey, Dad! It's good you're home now. A man from the city is here to read the gas meter upstairs." Just like she'd hoped, the man on the street said, "What are you talking about?" The man in the striped shirt, though, immediately bolted out of the house. The man on the street got extremely worried and kept asking us if we were okay, if we needed him to stay and wait in the yard with us until our parents got home. He was very sweet actually, in all honesty. We were so startled though that we barely had the chance to thank him before he rushed inside and slammed the doors and windows shut, locking them tight. As irate as my sister was that I'd let some stranger into the house, she begged me not to call the authorities. My parents had left her in charge, and she was worried she'd be in trouble. I also didn't want to catch any heat from carelessly allowing some rando in, so I was on the same page. 3 weeks later though, a girl in our community went missing. Same MO. She was home alone, and authorities found the door wide open, with no signs of forced entry. My sister and I discussed our options, but deep down we knew we had no choice but to come clean. We told the police everything we experienced. I don't know if it ever helped, but they did tell us they had reason to believe it was the exact same man. They also tracked down the man who helped us out on the street that day. Turns out we already knew him. He worked at the local butcher shop and we just hadn't recognized him that day. He was lifelong friends with our family after that. Our parents were of course mortified. They weren't angry at us particularly, they were glad we were okay, though they did review all the rules of caution and never left us home alone for a while after. They found the girl in the end. They said she'd been held for a few days and then burned alive. They never caught the man, but fear not. He was in what appeared to be his early 30s in the 1960s, so in any case he has to be dead by now.